Welcome, dear listeners. Tonight, prepare for a twist of fate that will redefine destiny. He never imagined that, hurrying into a taxi on that rainy night, destiny would be there, with a sly smile, ready to turn his world upside down. Inside the cab, the past awaited him, in the face of a woman he never forgot. And in her arms, a child with eyes identical to his own. Stay with me until the very end, because this isn't just another story. It's the best one you'll hear today. Let's begin. The Reckoning. A rainy night in Sterling City. The rain lashed down as if the sky were at war with Sterling City. Heavy, relentless, it mirrored the narrow sidewalks like shattered glass. Cars queued bumper to bumper, honking without rhythm, without patience, creating a chaotic symphony of headlights, horns, and panting engines. The grand boulevard, usually vibrant, seemed like a collapsing organism. People ran, sheltered by twisted umbrellas or makeshift bags, desperately trying to escape a night that felt endless. Peter Harrison leaned his head against the taxi window, breathing deeply, impatient. His wetsuit jacket clung to his white shirt. His hair, now shapeless, fell over his forehead, and the cell phone in his hand blinked incessantly. Missed calls, press messages, alerts from the family law firm. He answered none. The streets were a nightmare, and he had no time for explanations. When he saw the traffic light change and a taxi screech to a halt on the opposite corner, he didn't hesitate. He yanked open the door and climbed in. "Please, quickly, 184 Elmwood Street. Don't care what it costs, just go," he said, without even lifting his eyes. The driver merely glanced in the rearview mirror, frowning slightly. "Sir, the taxi's already occupied." Peter looked up, and the world, which until then had been a collapsing chaos, suddenly went silent. Sitting in the far corner, her face half hidden by a dark crimson scarf, and her eyes as sharp as a honed blade, was a woman. Her gaze held no surprise. It held containment, as if she had been struck from within and refused to let out a single sound. On her lap, a child. Small, perhaps 6 years old. Tousled brown hair, fair skin. His eyes, a deep honey brown, identical to Peter's. It was as if he were seeing a miniature version of himself, framed in a scene he couldn't begin to comprehend. The silence lasted too many seconds to be socially acceptable. She broke it first. "You can share the ride. I'm going to St. Jude's Medical Center." Rachel Miller's voice was firm, but no armor was strong enough to prevent the tremor in her tone. Each syllable seemed to walk on thin glass. Peter hesitated for a moment, but the gridlock, the relentless rain, and something buried deep within his soul pushed him inward. The door closed with the dry click of a choice he didn't yet know he had made. The taxi pulled away, and the world, once again, began to move. Slower now. The drumming of rain against the window competed with the frantic beat of Peter's heart. He stared out the window, but he didn't see the city. He was inside a whirlwind of memories he hadn't asked to feel. Beside him, the child looked curiously out the window. Small hands clutched a well-loved, faded plush keychain, and a foot swung in the air with a carefree rhythm. But what disconcerted him most was her. She was there, as real as the rain outside, and yet as distant as 7 years of silence. There was no makeup, no smile, just a tired face, but strikingly strong, like a wall that had survived a war, scarred but intact. Peter cleared his throat. You're Rachel." She didn't look at him. Her eyes remained fixed on the road ahead. "You know who I am." The phrase dropped like a poorly sheathed knife. There were no accusations, no drama, just a stark statement of fact, a mirror being held up. Peter felt his face flush. He wanted to speak. He wanted to ask. But the words felt improper, invasive, wrong for this moment. He looked at the child again, and this time, the child looked back at him. Eyes he knew from the mirror of his own childhood. An eternity compressed into a single gaze. The driver turned a corner, and the hospital appeared in the distance, with its cold lights and hurried movement of umbrellas. Rachel readied herself. She picked up her backpack, pulled a crumpled envelope from her bag. The child was already poised, like someone who knew the script of pain by heart. "Thanks for the ride," she said, without looking at him. Peter touched her shoulder, almost instinctively. "Wait, Rachel, that child is—" She cut him off with silence. That kind of silence that says more than any words. The kind of silence learned when life takes more than it gives. She opened the door, gently took the child, and stepped out. The driver didn't even need instructions. Peter remained there, trapped, staring through the wet glass as she walked away. The child looked back, over his shoulder, and waved his fingers. Rachel didn't look back. She disappeared through the hospital doors. Peter remained motionless, his breath caught between his ribs. The driver looked at him in the rearview mirror, but said nothing. There was something in that man, perhaps the wisdom of one who has seen too much, that made him understand. Certain journeys have no return, even when the path is not yet over. Peter leaned his head against the window again. He no longer felt the cold of the rain. The warmth came from within. A bitter, thick warmth. The kind that doesn't burn the skin, but what remains of innocence. It was only one night, he thought, but I never forgot her face. The city outside continued its collapse, but inside that taxi, stopped in front of the hospital, Peter's world had just been rewritten. Only he didn't know how yet, and perhaps he didn't even want to know. But he would, and that would break him in a different way. A slow, dry way that makes no noise, but corrodes from within like rust accumulated in silence. Imagine you are Peter. What thoughts are racing through your mind as you realize the truth about the child? What do you think he'll do next? Share your predictions in the comments below. Don't miss a beat of this intense story. Like this video and subscribe to our channel now for more gripping tales. Peter Harrison left the hospital that night with his hands in his pockets, his jacket collar pulled up against the rain that stubbornly returned, like a memory refusing to be forgotten. Her face, the same as on the night of the piano, returned with cruel clarity. But now there was something more. A new, living, pulsating presence. A child with eyes identical to his own, who existed somewhere between a denied past and a present that demanded too much courage to face. He spent the night wide awake. He tried to answer emails, review contracts, follow up on foundation reports, but nothing made sense. Everything seemed part of a life that was no longer his, as if he had been pushed out of his own existence. The next morning, he called Nicholas, his legal advisor. Short, direct. "I want to know everything you can about a patient named Daniel Evans, St. Jude's Hospital, absolute discretion." "Peter, it's an order." 2 days later, the documents arrived. Sealed. Heavy. Peter's fingers trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. The child suffered from a rare congenital heart condition, a ventricular septal defect, exactly the same one that led to his father, Mr. Richard, to a premature death at 54. The similarity wasn't just in the physical features, it was in the blood, in the genetic code, in what could no longer be denied. The age matched. The eyes matched. The broken heart, too. Peter sat on the penthouse sofa, let the papers fall onto the glass coffee table, and buried his hands in his hair. He wasn't crying. He no longer knew how. But there, in that room of modern lines, stark angles, and silence, he felt his emotional structure begin to yield. It was in that state that he received the first call from Uncle Robert. "Peter, your uncle's voice, as grave as always, leaving no room for nuance. I received some strange messages today. Something about you sniffing around medical records. Is that true?" Peter remained silent. "I'm not accusing you. I just want to understand. You know how the press is, and the foundation is in the middle of a renewal process. We can't leave room for rumors." More silence. Robert sighed. "Remember who you are." Peter hung up without responding. In the following days, the messages became more frequent. Some subtle, like a reminder of a charity dinner. Others, not so much. "The foundation needs your name clean. You have responsibilities, not freedoms. Don't let a memory turn into a scandal." Peter ignored them, but he felt them. He felt the weight of the name, of the tradition, of the oil portraits on the walls of the family estate in Greenwich. He felt the invisible hand of the family trying to drag him back into a world where everything was calculated, where love was weakness, where pain was a luxury, where a child outside the established norms was a threat. And it was precisely for that reason that he began to search for Rachel. First from afar. He observed where she lived, a small, 3-story building in the Northwood district. Simple, no doorman, with iron bars on the ground floor windows. Then, he learned she taught piano lessons in the mornings at a private conservatory. In the afternoons, she worked as a cook at a modest restaurant on Larkspur Lane. At night, she sold homemade sweets, cupcakes, truffles, sponges, at fairs, outside schools, and even by order on social media. Peter watched it all from a distance. It wasn't surveillance. It was guilt, or perhaps fear of stepping in and being cast out. The child, Daniel, stayed with his grandmother while Rachel worked. A short woman, her hair pulled back in a bun, a sweet gaze, and a straight posture. Peter saw her once crossing the street with her grandson, holding an umbrella with one hand and the child's blue backpack with the other. The child talked incessantly. The grandmother listened with a quiet but present smile. It was a simple love, but complete. And it was in that stark contrast between emails demanding his presence at foundation events and the sight of Rachel closing her sweet box at the end of the night, that Peter began to break. Inside. Silently. Without an audience. On Wednesday, it rained again. He decided to stop merely watching. He found her leaving the conservatory, sheet music tucked under her arm, and an exhausted expression. She saw him from a distance. She paused, took a deep breath, and kept walking. "Rachel." She continued walking. "Rachel, please." She stopped, slowly turned. "Now you're following me." "No, you hired someone to dig into my life. You investigated my son. You used your contacts, your money, your name, and now you show up here as if you have a right to demand something from me." Peter lowered his gaze for an instant. He needed to know. She stared at him. There was weariness, anger, but above all, hurt. "And now you know. Congratulations. Is he my son?" She hesitated, but the truth could no longer hide. "Yes." Peter felt the impact like a sharp blow. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because when I found out, you were with the Justice Minister's daughter, with the most expensive engagement ring in Sterling City on her finger. Because I was alone, scared, pregnant, because no one would believe me, not even you." The street felt small. Cars passed without urgency. People ignored them. But for the two of them, It was as if time had suspended. Peter stepped closer, a single step. "I would have believed you." Rachel laughed, a bitter sound. "No, Peter. You would have thought I wanted your money, your name, your inheritance, everything, except to believe that he was just a son. Ours. Truly." He swallowed. "You're right." She seemed surprised by his honesty. "But now I'm here. And what does that change?" "Everything." She fell silent for a moment. Then her gaze softened, just slightly. "He likes to draw, and carrot cake, and he's afraid of the dark. If you really want to be here, you're going to have to learn all that. And more." Peter nodded, almost in a whisper. "I want to." Rachel took a deep breath, almost like one submerging underwater. "Then come in. But know this, in here, the Harrison name means nothing." And she turned. He stood still, watching her walk away. But this time, he didn't feel like he was being cast out. He felt that, perhaps for the first time, he was being tested. And he wanted to pass it. Not out of pride, nor to prove he could. Peter wanted to succeed because, for the first time in his life, the future didn't feel like a contract to sign, but a minefield of emotional truths he needed to traverse barefoot. And in the center of that field, there was a brown-eyed child who silently called out, "Daddy!" What do you think will be the biggest challenge for Peter as he tries to earn Rachel's trust and a place in Daniel's life? Share your thoughts below. Don't miss a moment of this raw, emotional journey. Like this video and subscribe to our channel now. It was Rachel who set the rules for contact. No visits outside of what was agreed upon. No approaching Daniel until she felt Peter was ready. No invasions of their privacy. Peter accepted all terms. He started discreetly. Driving Daniel to the doctor when Rachel was at work. Picking up medication in the early hours. Cooking for the three of them when she returned exhausted from one of her shifts. Then, something unexpected happened. Bedtime stories. He, sitting by the bed, his voice softer than his pride would have allowed in other times. Daniel watched him like someone glimpsing a dream, not giving himself over immediately, but not pulling away either. One Saturday morning, Peter showed up with pancakes, made by himself. Rachel, still sleepy, got out of bed with a frown, expecting to find the smell of disaster. Instead, she found the kitchen filled with flour, clumsily chopped strawberries, and the child grinning, his face smeared with chocolate. Peter was wiping down the counter with a strangely light expression. Rachel leaned against the doorway and watched him. For a second, she saw something different there. An unarmed man. The same face that had enchanted her years ago. But now, tired of pretending to be what his family wanted. She said nothing. Neither did he. They just exchanged glances, like those who have held a secret for too long. The routine, little by little, intertwined them. Not like a courtship, not like a plan, but like a life unfolding amidst exhaustion. Peter began to know Daniel without fanfare. He discovered he was terrible at math, but assembled 1,000-piece puzzles with astonishing concentration. That he hated milk, but loved corn on the cob. That he cried silently when he was in pain. And that he said, "I'm fine," in the same way Peter himself used to say when he was a child, and no one had time to listen beyond that. Peter's presence became constant. Rachel started to let him in, but not to touch. Not where it hurt. Until that Sunday. It was raining, as it always seemed to rain on days when the world wanted to change. Daniel fell asleep early after a tiring day. Rachel was washing dishes, and Peter was drying them. It was simple. Domestic. Almost ridiculous in its reality. She messed up the cake recipe he had promised to take to school the next day. She mixed sugar with salt. Peter laughed. She rolled her eyes. "You're going to say you can do it better." "No, but I'm excellent at laughing at other people's mistakes." She threw a kitchen towel at him. He pretended to duck, exaggerating like a bad actor. They laughed. They laughed for real, for the first time without weight. In the midst of the messy kitchen, their fingers touched. First by accident, then not. The kitchen fell silent. Only the sound of the rain persisted, tapping against the window with cruel delicacy. Rachel looked up. His eyes were there, warm, present. There were no words between them, only an electrical tension, but not like 7 years ago. It wasn't the raw impulse of two bodies seeking each other in the dark. It was a desire filled with history. Peter touched her face with his fingertips, slowly, like one confirming something is still there. She didn't flinch, nor did she lean in, but she didn't deny him. The kiss was inevitable. Slow, contained, heavy, with years of silence, with sleepless nights, with questions never asked. It wasn't a kiss of apologies. It was a pause, a plea. When their lips parted, the world was still there, but something inside her had cracked. "We shouldn't have done this," Rachel said, her voice too small for the weight it carried. Peter didn't hesitate. "But I waited 7 years for this to happen again." She recoiled. 1 step, 2, as if only now realizing what had transpired, as if something within her, which had been slowly rebuilt, had cracked again. "You don't understand," she whispered. This costs me much more than it would cost you." He stood still. "You have somewhere to go back to. You have money. You have a family. You have protection. Me, I have my son, and everything I built with my own hands, alone." Peter wanted to say he wasn't that man anymore, that he didn't want to be, but any words would be just noise against her fear. "Rachel, I'm not trying to erase your history. I'm trying to enter it." She smiled, sadly, and that's the danger, because a part of me wants to let you in, but the other part still remembers the day I woke up alone, pregnant, with no one to call. Peter felt the impact. He didn't respond. He just stood there, watching the walls rise again, watching her retreat not out of disinterest, but out of panic, because too much love, after abandonment, feels like a threat. He took a step forward. Just one. "I'm not going to force anything on you, nor ask you to forget what happened, but I'm not going to pretend this means nothing to me." Rachel looked away. She took a deep breath. She fought against herself, against what she felt and what she feared. "Good night, Peter," and she walked out of the kitchen. He remained there, the towel dropped on the floor, the smell of raw dough in the air, the sound of rain once again, the only constant. That night, neither of them slept, and when dawn broke, the silence between them was a minefield. Rachel made coffee without looking at him. Peter prepared Daniel's backpack as if he'd done it all his life. When the child came out, smiling, and Peter handed him a snack wrapped with a red ribbon, Rachel watched. In silence. Something in her wanted to hate him, but everything about him disproved that fear. He wasn't running, but she still didn't know how to let him stay, and that was the wound that hurt the most. It wasn't the pain of betrayal, because Peter never promised to stay that first night, nor the pain of loneliness, because that had been a part of Rachel's skin for years, like a scar learned to hide under routine. It was the pain of almost believing, almost surrendering, and having to retreat to survive. Given Rachel's deep-seated fears and past trauma, What do you think it will take for her to finally trust Peter and let him fully into her life? Share your thoughts below. Don't miss the dramatic turning point. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more impactful stories. The day after the kiss, Rachel put on her armor. Her voice was neutral, her gaze practical. Her gestures carefully avoided touch. At the breakfast table, she spread butter on bread with the same precision with which one cuts ties. Peter noticed. He tried. He tried with silence, because too many words could open the door to manipulation. He tried with presence, folding Daniel's coat, warming his milk, adjusting appointment times. But where there was once a space that seemed to shorten, now there was an abyss again. And he no longer leaped without looking. It was Tuesday when the blow arrived. Peter was leaving the pediatric cardiologist's office with Daniel beside him, both laughing about some bad superhero joke, when his cell phone vibrated. Unknown number. He answered instinctively. "I'm waiting across from the restaurant where she works." The voice, cold as a knife blade. Peter stopped in the middle of the sidewalk. Daniel looked at him, confused. "Can you meet me alone, right now?" Peter told the child he had to sort something out and called a car to take him to his grandmother's house. The little one protested, but accepted with the promise of pancakes later. 20 minutes later, Peter approached the corner of the restaurant. Mr. Robert, his uncle, was there. Impeccable, as always. Dark gray overcoat, polished shoes, hands clasped behind his back. But his gaze carried the weight of a judgment without a court. "Is this how you use the Harrison name now? On dirty doorsteps, with stained aprons, and children out of wedlock?" Peter didn't respond. He stopped in front of his uncle and faced him. "She is my son's mother. A son born of your recklessness. A son who breathes today thanks to her strength, not mine." Robert took another step closer. "You have a name to protect. Companies, contracts, foundations, people who depend on your image. Are you really going to risk everything for a whim from the past?" Peter clenched his fists. A car passed, splashing water on his legs. Neither moved. "She doesn't want our money," Peter said. "She has refused every penny so far. She never looked for me, never asked you for anything. She just wants to live in peace." "You're naive, Peter. Everyone wants something. She'll want more. She'll want your name. She'll want the weight of the inheritance. She'll want your place at the table." Peter took a deep breath. He thought of Rachel, sweating in the hot kitchen of the restaurant, of Daniel, drawing dragons with colored pencils in a corner of the living room, of sleepless nights, of swallowed words, of silences that hurt more than screams. And then he said, "If loving my son and his mother stains this name you so fiercely defend, then let it be erased from history." Robert stood motionless, for the first time, without an immediate response. "If that name demands that I pretend they don't exist, then I don't want it anymore." The metal back door of the restaurant slowly opened. Rachel had heard everything. She hadn't planned it. She just stepped out for some air between serving trays. But she found the scene already formed. The man she had always feared, a symbol of everything Peter could become again. And Peter, choosing. She didn't move, nor did she close the door. She just watched. Peter saw her. He wasn't surprised. He simply turned to her, met her eyes. He said nothing, because he had already said everything. Mr. Robert irritably brushed off his coat. He walked away without looking back. Peter remained there, still. The water on the sidewalk soaked his expensive shoes. His knees felt like they weighed a ton. The world, strange, as if, by breaking a cycle, He had given up a part of himself he hadn't even known he was still carrying. Rachel slowly approached. Her hands were covered in flour. Her hair was pulled back haphazardly, her breath still short from the heat of the kitchen. "You'd really do that?" Her voice wasn't armed. It was broken, like someone testing the air. "I already did." She bit her lower lip, her eyes beginning to glisten. "You don't know what that means. I know I want a life where I can look my son in the eye without lying about who I am, a life where you don't have to fight alone all the time. And if that means turning my back on those who never truly saw me, then yes, I know exactly what it means." Rachel looked down. The words were too much. The emotions, even more so. "And what do you expect now?" Peter breathed. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, his voice was firm. "I don't expect you to trust me again overnight, but I want to earn it. Every morning, every silence, every time you try to push me away, and I'm still here." She almost smiled, but the smile didn't come. Only a single tear, quick, small, rebellious. "You talk as if it's easy. It's not. But it's true." She felt it, just once. Then she took a step back, looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. "Then give me time." Peter simply replied, "All the time you need." She walked back into the kitchen. But now, there was something new in the way she closed the door. It wasn't to keep him out. It was to breathe before opening it again. And that night, Rachel breathed like one preparing her body to face what her heart still feared. Not because she already trusted, but because, for the first time in years, she wanted to trust. How do you think Peter's willingness to sacrifice his family's legacy will affect his internal journey and his ability to connect with Rachel? Share your insights. Don't miss the powerful conclusion. Like this video and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories. The days that followed weren't about romance. They were about resilience. Resilience against fear, against repetition, against the temptation to give up before something went wrong. Daniel's surgery was approaching, and with it, a kind of tension that even the truest love couldn't soften. Daniel knew something was about to happen. He was too smart to be fooled by sweet words or distractions. He asked few questions, but observed everything. His drawings began to change. Once filled with dragons and superheroes, they now showed families, hands held, a male figure, always close, with a discreet smile, like Peter's. Rachel noticed it, but didn't comment. She kept every drawing as if collecting evidence of something that time still needed to consolidate. Peter, for his part, made no promises, but he was present in every gesture, in every difficult silence. He began to sleep on the sofa occasionally, by his own choice, on days when Rachel had to get up early. He learned to put Daniel's clothes in the dryer without shrinking them, to prepare rice exactly how she liked it, fluffy with garlic, and even to hide toys when they had hospital visitors. When Rachel's grandmother observed them, she said nothing. She only smiled discreetly. One evening, at dusk, while folding sheets, she approached her daughter, her gaze firm. "He's not going to leave easily." Rachel held the sheet in the air, as if the fabric could protect her from a truth that still hurt to hear. "I know," her mother continued, without raising her voice. "Have you noticed how he looks at you?" Rachel didn't respond. Her mother insisted. "Like he's found home after being lost in the world." Rachel took a deep breath, her eyes clouded, but firm. "What if he's here out of guilt?" The older woman slowly folded the sheet and said, with the calm of one who has seen everything, "Guilt doesn't make a man lose sleep by a child's side. Love does." That night, Rachel watched Peter asleep, sitting on the sofa. his body twisted. One hand on his forehead, the other holding a sheet with the surgery schedule. A half-filled glass of water and a children's book open on his lap. She stood there, leaning against the doorway, her face caught between the hallway light and the darkness of the room, trying to understand how someone she had pushed away so many times was still there. She asked nothing, said nothing. She simply turned off the light so he could sleep in peace. 2 nights later, the surgery. Peter arrived at the hospital before them. He carried a small backpack, documents organized in a folder, and a gaze that tried to be firm. Daniel, seeing him, ran and launched himself into his arms. He said quietly, close to his father's ear, "I'm scared." Peter replied, "Me too." And it was then that Daniel smiled, as if hearing that made him stronger, as if it was good to know that adults also trembled inside. The wait was cruel. Time seemed to stand still. Every time someone in scrubs emerged from a door, Rachel held her breath. Peter paced back and forth, his face still, but his fingers restless. "Do you think he's going to be okay?" she asked, as if she could no longer keep it in. "No, I'm sure," he replied, without hesitation. "What if something goes wrong?" Peter moved closer, took her hands. It was the first time he had touched her since the kiss. "Then we hold on, together." She wanted to pull away, but she didn't. The surgery lasted 4 hours. When the doctor came out, the words seemed to float in the air. "Everything went well. He's stable. He'll recover quickly." Rachel collapsed into the chair. She cried silently, her hands covering her face. Peter stood, his eyes glassy, but making no sound. His whole body trembled. Hours later, in the room, the light was soft, and the heart monitor beat steadily. Daniel slept, pale but serene. Rachel sat in the armchair beside him. Peter leaned against the wall, not wanting to invade, just present. Until Daniel opened his eyes. It took a few seconds for him to focus. Then he looked at his mother. "Mommy?" She stood up instantly, rushed to him, took his hand gently. "I'm here, love. Mommy's here." Daniel slowly turned his eyes to the other side of the room. He looked at Peter. "He was there the whole time, right, Mommy?" Rachel tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't come out. She only nodded, her eyes moist. "He was, my love. He was." Daniel smiled, closed his eyes, went back to sleep. Peter slowly approached. He touched his son's hand with 2 fingers, as if thanking him without words. Rachel watched him, and for the first time, she felt that this room was no longer just hers and her son's. It was all 3 of theirs. They still didn't know what would come next, but there, in that hospital room, under a dim light and a faint breath, something was forming that no surname, no past pain, no present fear could erase. A family was forming, without needing to say it, without needing to promise. Just being. And that was how, with nothing more than the silence between 2 hearts and the soft breath of a child returning from the edge of the abyss, life began to rearrange itself, without announcement, without spectacle. Only truth. What profound impact do you believe Daniel's recovery and Peter's consistent presence will have on Rachel's ability to fully trust and embrace their shared future? Share your insights in the comments. In the days following the surgery, Peter remained at the hospital. He slept in an uncomfortable armchair, took turns with Rachel during the early hours watching the monitors, and navigated the emotional crises that arose when Daniel was asleep. He didn't need to prove anything, but everything he did proved it. Daniel recovered quickly. He was hungry, full of suppressed laughter, and had a curious need to paint the entire world with crayons. He drew monsters and said they were the guardians of his heart, now protecting it from within. When Rachel asked him where he got those ideas, Daniel pointed to Peter. He told me. It was always like that. He told me. He stayed. He's here. It was a warm, sunny afternoon, almost a week after the surgery, that Rachel suggested the three of them go down to the hospital garden. Daniel insisted on seeing real flowers, and Peter carried him to a bench under the shadiest tree. Rachel followed behind, with the folded blanket and a silent, weighty decision in her chest. Daniel sat between them. He looked at the sky. He was quieter than usual. He seemed to sense that this moment carried more than just flowers. Then Peter looked at him. "Daniel, do you remember when you said you were a superhero?" The boy nodded, his eyes squinting against the sunlight. "Yes, I remember. He was by your side the whole time." Daniel slowly turned his face, serious as only children can be when they understand more than they say. "Are you him?" Peter breathed. The answer was no longer a secret, but saying it aloud made everything more real. "I'm your daddy." But Daniel smiled softly, as if confirming something his heart already knew before reason allowed it. "I already knew. I just wanted to hear it from you." Rachel took her son's hand. Peter gently touched the child's shoulder. Time stood still for an instant there, between the rustling leaves and the distant footsteps of nurses. Later, in the room, while Daniel slept again, Peter went to get water. Rachel remained in the chair by the bed, her face turned towards her son, but her mind elsewhere. Her grandmother entered, slowly. She sat beside her daughter. She said nothing for a while. She only looked at her sleeping grandson, then at Rachel, with the gentle eyes of one who knows that the world keeps turning because mothers keep going, even when they're broken inside. "He seems happy," she said softly. "Is he? And you?" Rachel took a moment to respond. Then, almost confessing a sin, "I'm scared to be happy too." Her mother just squeezed her hand. It wasn't a day for judgments. It was a day for healing. That night, Peter waited until everyone was asleep and stood alone on the hospital terrace. The sky was clear, rare in Sterling City. Leaning on the railing, his gaze lost, he wasn't thinking of anything concrete when he felt a presence behind him. Rachel approached without a word. She stood beside him in silence, both looking at the sky as if, somehow, they were searching for a safe place among the stars. "It's cold," she said. Peter took off his jacket and offered it to her. She accepted it. It was a small gesture, but it said everything. After a while, he turned to her. "I fell in love with you that night, the very first, and I never forgot you." Rachel smiled faintly. "I thought you only remembered the wine and the piano. I remember how you looked at me before you turned off the light. The silence you made, the way you slept, like someone who finally found rest." She looked down, her hands tucked inside the jacket. "I thought it was just a pause," Peter continued. "Maybe it was, but even a pause can contain everything an entire life never knew how to say." She looked at him, this time directly, with the strength of one who no longer flees. "And now? Now I love the woman you are, the mother, the fighter, the woman who gave me the greatest gift of my life." He extended his hand slowly. "Will you give me a chance to get it right this time?" Rachel felt tears welling up, but they didn't fall. There was a firmness in her fragility. "Yes, I'll give you that chance." She squeezed his hand. "But more than anything, I'm giving myself that chance." Peter moved closer. They didn't kiss. There was no need. It was more intimate this way, as if the touch of their hands said what their entire bodies understood. There, under the stars of a city that had once separated them and now brought them back to the same place, were three hearts that had crossed what needed to be crossed. And although the surname had not yet been spoken in documents or at family parties, now it existed. A name called love. That needs no surname to be worth everything. What do you believe is the most significant takeaway from Peter and Rachel's journey of rebuilding their love and family? Share your insights in the comments below. 2 years had passed since that profound conversation in the garden. Sterling City remained largely the same in so many ways. The hurried pace of its streets, the fleeting smiles that lasted as long as a shop window, the haste with which the seasons changed without asking permission. But something, amidst the cobblestones of Grand Square, seemed different this summer afternoon. There was an 8-year-old boy walking with an ice cream cone melting between his fingers, laughing loudly at something only he understood. His brown curls bounced in the wind, and his eyes, those eyes still said more than his mouth. He ran a few steps ahead, then looked back to make sure they were still there. They were. Peter and Rachel walked side by side. He carried a child's backpack on his back, like one who had grown accustomed to the sweet weight of routine. She walked slowly, one hand intertwined with his, the other resting gently on the rounded curve of her belly. 7 months of waiting, 7 months of another story beginning. They paused when the sound of a piano filled the air. On the corner of the square, a street musician, an old acquaintance to loving couples and distracted tourists, played the same melody that, years ago, had enveloped two souls on a night that seemed to mean nothing, until it came to mean everything. Rachel recognized the tune even before the first note finished. Her entire body responded. She closed her eyes and smiled. Peter watched her in silence. He knew what that music held. He knew that her memory wasn't in the sound. It was in what remained between the notes. The pause, the desire, the absence, and above all, the reunion. Daniel ran back, hugged his father's leg, showed him his new shirt stained with chocolate. Rachel laughed. Peter playfully scolded him, and the piano played on. None of the three said that day was special. There was no need. The city witnessed, unknowingly, a scene from a story that almost didn't happen. But it did. And now, it lives. This time, love doesn't leave at dawn. It wakes up beside them, makes coffee, takes their son to school, accompanies ultrasounds, listens to melodies in the square, and it stays. If you made it this far, it's because this story truly captivated you. So I ask you, from my heart, support me on this journey. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell icon. That helps me immensely to keep creating emotional, soulful stories that touch us deeply and stay with us for days. And don't forget to comment below. Would you believe in love after so many heartbreaks and missed connections? Share it with someone who needs to hear this today. With your support, I continue. And with you here, every story is even more worthwhile.